Hello BookTube. I still sound as if I've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for the last 50 years of my life because it is the most wonderful time of the year and everybody I know is getting struck down by some kind of cold flu virus. But alas, the vlog must go on because this year I am on a Christmas mission. I feel like I might have mentioned this on the channel briefly before, but I am not a Christmassy person. I find this time of year to be incredibly overwhelming. I really despise the consumerism of it all, the waste of it all, and I just generally don't have a very good time around Christmas. It's not my thing. I don't want to yuck anyone else's yum. If you love Christmas, I'm like so pleased for you, but it's just not for me. It's just not my jam. I'm not about it. What I am about is romance books. In the last couple of years, romance has just become one of my most read genres. I never expected that to be the case because I'm like the least romantic person ever. But yeah, I don't know what it is. I've just come to really enjoy a good romance book. I love contemporary romance, historical romance, romantic fantasy, literary romance, romance and anything. I'm into it. I thought what would be a fun little experiment for this December would be to read a bunch of Christmassy themed romances to see if I can finally get myself into the Christmas spirit. So for the next week or two, we'll see, however long I feel like filming for, I am going to be reading a bunch of Christmas romances. And so I'm going to tell you about some of the options that I have available to me on my TBR, and then we're going to go from there. I have 3 romance books physically that I've picked up over the last year and a bit, I think. I have a couple of options on my Kobo, and then I do also have a bunch of audiobooks that I could get through Everand. I'm not going to go through every single one of those options because there are loads of Christmas romance audiobooks on Everand, but I'm kind of in the midst of like doing a bunch of crochet for like Christmas presents and things, so there's a strong chance that I'll be listening to some on audio as well. But in the interest of not keeping you here in the intro for a million years, I'm not going to talk about every single book that I could get as an audiobook through Everand. Would be here forever. So I'm just going to let you know which books I have on my physical TBR and which books I've picked up on my Kobo. We'll start with the book I've discussed before. We have Good Spirits by B.K. Borison, and I have also recently picked up Love Light Farms by the same author on the Kobo as well. For anyone who hasn't seen this around, you must have done if you've been out in public recently. Good Spirits is B.K. Borison's most recent release, her second release of 2025. I read First Time Caller earlier this year. It's my first B.K. Borison, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm really excited for the second book in that series to come out early in 2026. But in the meantime, I've got this Christmassy themed romance from her to enjoy. This one follows, I believe his name is Noah, and he is a ghost of Christmas past, so his entire job is to go around and haunt terrible people, and he finds that to be quite a tedious existence. He's not really loving life, and then he gets assigned to this really joyful, lovely, all-around nice person, and neither of them can really work out why Noah has been assigned to her because he's got nothing to haunt her about. She's just an all-round decent human being. So they kind of team up to try and work out what is going on, and over the course of the novel they're going to fall in love, obviously they're going to fall in love. Love Light Farms, I'm less sure on the premise of. It's been a while since I looked up what that book was about, but I believe it involves fake dating to save a Christmas tree farm. I think that is the general summary. If I get around to it, I will let you know if that was correct or if I just pulled that out of my ass. The next 2 books I have physically are both queer books. I'm going to start with The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is also kind of vaguely fantastical themed. This is more explicitly fantastical, I think, than Good Spirits is, but they're both on the fantasy romance spectrum. I would just like it to be known that I despise this cover. And I also despise the US cover of this book. I feel like this book has been done dirty, you know, both here and across the pond in terms of the cover art. And justice for Sarah Rash, because These book covers are gross, I hate them. But this one just sounds like it's going to be a silly, goofy, fun time. We are following Cole, who is the Prince of Christmas, and he is kind of a bit off the rails, doesn't really get on with his father, who is the reigning Santa Claus. This book just sounds so goofy. And so to rein in his bad behaviour, Santa engages him to the Princess of Easter, I think, who is like his childhood best friend. And then the Prince of Halloween shows up to contest this and like fight for the hand of the Princess of Easter. But it turns out these two like hooked up previously. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, there's some drama there. I've heard people just say that this is just a great, silly, fun time. And after being laid up with a cold-induced migraine for like a considerable chunk of time, I could do with having a bit of silly fun. So that's The Nightmare Before Christmas. This next book is Look Up Handsome by Jack Strange, which I definitely plan on getting to because it is one of my book club reads for December. My queer book club tends to read a queer Christmas romance every year in December, and this year we've got two that people voted for. We've got Look Up Handsome, and we also have Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrun, which I have on Kobo and would love to get to as well. But I'm really excited to read Look Up Handsome because it's set in Hay-on-Wye, which is obviously one of my favourite places in the whole world, and it features a bookseller and a romance author. It sounds like it's going to be a bit like Grump Sunshine. It sounds like the owner of the only queer bookshop in Hay-on-Wye is facing the closure of his business, and so he has to kind of team up with the very reluctant visiting romance author to try and save his business, and then they're going to fall in love along the way, and it just sounds so lovely. I love that this one is set in Wales. It's by a Welsh author. It's in one of my favourite places in the whole world, so I definitely plan on getting to this one. Then Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrun is another one I really want to get to so that I can talk about both books at the next book club meeting. Kiss Her Once for Me is a sapphic Christmas romance. I've read from Alison Cochrun before. I've read The Charm Offensive and absolutely loved it. I thought that was a wonderful contemporary romance. So I'm really excited to get around to another book by Alison Cochrun. Kiss Her Once for Me, I believe, follows a kind of down on her luck woman in her 20s. A year ago, she had this like passionate night of love with like this woman that she's been obsessed with ever since but has never seen again. She has been fired from her dream job. She's working in a coffee shop making ends meet, and she has to kind of team up with the landlord who owns the coffee shop, and they have to agree to fake date and visit his family for the holidays. And then lo and behold, who happens to be the landlord's sister? It is the woman that she's been obsessed with for the past year that she hooked up with last Christmas. So that one I think has got kind of like a silly, fun fake dating premise. But Alison Cochrun's books, well, from what I've heard of Alison Cochrun's books and from my one experience of reading The Charm Offensive, she does also deal with deeper themes. Like The Charm Offensive dealt with mental health in a big way. It dealt with later life coming out, explorations of spectrum identities, and it was really, really tender and nuanced exploration of those themes. So I'm hoping that Kiss Her Once for Me will deliver in a similar way. I'm going to stop talking now before I completely lose my voice because I can hear that it's going slowly. These are the 3 physical books that I have to crack on with. I've also got Love Like Farms and Kiss Her Once for Me on my Kobo, so plenty to be getting on with, and I will be back and update you once I've started the first book of the vlog. Hello bookish people, I have a reading update for you. I actually have read 2 books since we last spoke. So my bad about that. I got a bit worse again before I started to get a bit better again. So I've been reading, but I haven't really felt well enough to sit down and be on camera. The thing with romances, and me in particular, is when I read a romance, I just find it so easy to fly through. So I'll get through a romance book in like 2-3 days, no trouble. So I have been reading fairly quickly. The first book I decided to pick up was Good Spirits by B.K. Borison, and I really wanted to love this one, and for the most part I did have a really good time, but ultimately I settled on a 3.75 for this. To go over the synopsis briefly, we have Nolan. I think I called him Noah before. His name is Nolan, and he is a ghost of Christmas past, and the world, the setting of this is really fun. I enjoy kind of like light fantasy versions of our world where we take fantastical or fictional concepts and make them real. So in this one you've got Grim Reapers, you've got poltergeists, you've got ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, and they're all real and they exist within this kind of bureaucratic administrative system whereby there's offices, they have superiors that they report to, and that's quite fun. I enjoy taking a fantasy element like that and kind of settling it in the mundane of our world. Something about that just always really tickles me, I don't know why. But we have Nolan, and every year he is assigned to someone who is not a great person, and it is his job for the first part of December to take them back through their memories and make them realise what a horrible ass hat of a person they are and get them to change their ways, and then he passes them on to the ghost of Christmas present and they take it from there. And he is very disillusioned with this. He has been dead for like over 100 years. He was a real person, which is something I didn't realise going into this, is that he was a real human being, and this is like the job that he has been assigned in the afterlife. And it's kind of a bummer for him. Like every year he just has to go and look through the memories of some of like the most scummy people in society and try and hope that they change their ways, and so he's not really loving his afterlife right now. And then the female main character is a woman called Harriet York, who comes from a very high achieving, very buttoned up, straight laced kind of family. And she's kind of the black sheep of the family because she doesn't want to go into like the family law firm. She doesn't want to go down the path that her parents have kind of strictly laid out for her. She wants to do her own thing, and her family are not very accepting of that. So she's a very sweet and kind-hearted person, but she's incredibly lonely. And she's like putting on a brave face for the world, but she's like got some demons, you know. And so when Nolan is assigned to her for his assignment for this Christmas period, they're both very confused because as they go back through Harriet's memories, it becomes very clear to both of them that she's a decent person and she doesn't really have any reason to be assigned this ghost of Christmas past. So they have to then work together to figure out why Nolan has been assigned Harriet, what is going on, and the story unravels from there. And it is quite silly at times, but in a way that I don't feel takes itself too seriously. Hello. Come up then. Come on. Yes. Wednesday is here, everyone. Wednesday would like you to know that she has arrived. I had some issue reading this in that I liked Harriet and Nolan, but Nolan feels incredibly similar to Aidan, the male main character from First Time Caller, which I read earlier this year. And so it did feel a little bit of like more of the same where, and Harriet as well, to be honest, they both felt very similar to both of the protagonists of First Time Caller, where you've got Nolan, who's like this grumpy, disillusioned guy, and then Harriet, who is this like really loving and sweet, lovely person who's like been through some stuff and is like, you know, working on her own demons or whatever. And she's like kind of lonely in her adulthood and stuff. And that felt very similar to Lucy as well, thinking about it from First Time Caller. So it did feel a little bit cookie cutter in the characterization, whereas the world and the setup of the romance is very different. The characters felt like the same archetypes, so that was a little bit maybe boring. It would have been nice to see a little bit of a different dynamic, but I did like them both. The romance is sweet, the resolution is very lovely. It did actually feel like there were real stakes in this. Sometimes you don't feel in a romance, you kind of, sometimes it can be a bit frustrating, these characters just like won't get it together and the reasoning can be kind of flimsy, But in this, the way that this world works is that once somebody has been through the ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future situation, they don't remember it after the fact, and they do not remember the ghosts that they have been visited by. And so when Nolan and Harriet realise that they've started to fall for each other, they both believe that at the end of it, Nolan is going to have to go back to his job and Harriet's going to forget all about him. And it is actually incredibly sad, and it does make you really feel for the characters. Can you leave my tripod alone, please? The tripod is not going to give you a fuss. The tripod is an inanimate object. It can't fuss you back. And so when they're grappling with this, it is actually incredibly sad at times, and the stakes do feel quite real because, as far as they know, Harriet's going to forget all about this like beautiful relationship that they've developed together. Obviously a massive bummer for them. Ultimately, I think I would have settled on a 4-star for this one, but there was one thing that really took me out of the novel. I think it was like 45% of the way through. And it's such a nitpicky thing, but I couldn't let it go. There is a joke about mental health, about someone having a mental breakdown, and it's used as like a punchline to a joke. And I really didn't like it. It felt incredibly in poor taste, and I really didn't like that choice. We all exist within this very prejudiced society, and we inhale these prejudices, and we all have ideas that we've internalized that we need to like work on, whatever. But this has been written and rewritten and rewritten and edited and has gone through so many pairs of hands before it gets published that when a joke like that is looked over and is it still included, it feels very frustrating that has been allowed to pass through all of the edits of the book. So that pissed me off and I didn't like it. And so for that reason I did knock off part of a star, and I didn't want to give it a full 4-star because I felt like that joke was in very poor taste and I didn't enjoy it at all. Having said that, if you're interested in the premise of this, if you like your romances with a little like light dusting of fantasy elements in them, but nothing too intensely fantastical, this would be a good place for you to go for like a fun Christmas romance. I probably will pick up the rest of the books in this series because there's going to be more, and it sounds like it will expand on like the Grim Reapers and other things like that, and we will have relationships with other fantastical ghostly creatures, and that just sounds like a good fun time to me. So I probably will pick up the next one, but I hope that as I read more B.K. Borison, the character archetypes get mixed up a little bit, because this really did feel like Aidan and Lucy 2.0, which was a bit of a shame. It would have been nice to have a different kind of relationship and character dynamic to explore in the book. But overall, it was a lovely, silly, light-hearted, fun time, and I did, for the most part, really enjoy my time with it. Then I decided to give a second chance to an author that I've mentioned before that I haven't gotten on with previously, and that is Timothy Janovsky. I decided to pick up You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, which is the second book, and I think it's called the Boy Meets Boy series. The first one is Never Been Kissed, which I read, I want to say last year. Didn't enjoy that book at all. I gave it a 3-star, which I think in hindsight was very generous of me, and it's more like a 2.5 star. I really didn't have any positive things to say about that book. I was being quite generous when I awarded it a 3-star. But I thought, I don't want to not give an author a second chance to impress me. There's nothing like problematic or egregious about the book. It was just kind of boring and not very well written, and the relationship dynamic wasn't interesting or compelling. So I decided to mostly listen to the audiobook of You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, which follows this kind of Grinch setup where you have this very spoiled rich kid, Matthew Prince, who lives in New York and has kind of been banished for the holidays by his very wealthy, high-achieving parents for a big PR misstep that they are trying to keep out of the press. So they send him off to a small town called Wind River, where his mother is from and where his maternal grandparents still live. And he is sent to stay with them for Christmas. He's cut off from his bank accounts and from social media. He's on like a full social media blackout to try and keep this story out of the press. And when he moves in with his grandparents, he discovers that they actually have a lodger at the moment, a student of his grandfather's called Hector Martinez. Hector is staying with them throughout the course of his studies because he can't afford to rent any accommodation in the town. And his grandfather recognised that he's very talented academic and wanted to give him the chance to continue his studies at college. So they kindly took him in. But this does mean that he and Matthew are sharing bunk beds in the spare room. And they immediately get off on the wrong foot. Matthew, as I've said, is a kind of spoiled socialite type of character who's very caught up in wealth and appearances and kind of just like young Nepo baby culture, I guess. And Hector is from a working class family, is a hard worker, recognises the value of working hard and achieving things off your own merit, and finds Matthew to be immediately just like intolerable, which, fair enough, he is very intolerable. At the beginning of the book, I wasn't sure going into it how much I could deal with this like spoiled rich kid character. Matthew is incredibly annoying at the beginning. I have to hand it to Timothy Janovsky. Matthew does really come into his own throughout the course of the novel. He and Hector are basically forced to pair up to help throw the town's annual Christmas charity gala in support of small businesses in the town, which includes his grandmother's used bookstore, which has fallen on hard financial times. Over the course of organising this event together, they develop this friendship, which develops into something more, and I enjoyed the relationship. It wasn't anything mind-blowing to me. I didn't like fall in love with them as a couple. I thought they were both interesting and sweet kind of characters. Hector is maybe a little bit, I don't want to say he's one-dimensional, but he does feel a little bit one-note at times. Matthew seems to get a lot more development, but that could just be because the book is from Matthew's perspective, and we find out a lot more about his personal struggles with his mental health, with his strained relationships with his parents and things like that, whereas Hector is a little bit more removed from us as the reader. I think it did a fair enough job of exploring, like I said, themes of mental health. Matthew suffers with generalized anxiety disorder, which is discussed quite a lot throughout the book, and I thought was handled for the most part with care. We really see Matthew develop in the way that he's able to open up to people about this anxiety and kind of come into his own with it. I think for me, something about the writing style of Timothy Janovsky's books just doesn't work. Something about the humour just doesn't quite land for me. It's not necessarily that it's badly written. I think it's maybe just quite youthful, but that sometimes strays into the immature a little bit. Something about the writing, just the word choices sometimes just strike me as kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, to be honest. It just feels a little bit immature sometimes, the word choice. And I wonder if that's because the characters in the books are so young, like Matthew's like 21, and I'm pretty sure the main character of Never Been Kissed was also very young as well, like early 20s, late teens, early 20s. And I wonder if it's because those are the characters that he's writing, and then he carries that over into the writing style as well, or if it's just the way that he writes his books generally. Even when the characters are going through something a bit like deeper, they're having more of a tender, intimate moment, the writing style still just like doesn't quite work for me. It's hard to give you a specific example because I listened to it on audio and I didn't like make a note of like quotes or anything as I was listening. I do have to say, credit where it's due, the narrator, whose name escapes me at the minute, but I will like put it on the screen, I'll leave it in the description. The audiobook narrator for this book was very, very good. I sometimes find with male or masculine presenting audiobook narrators, they tend to do these very high-pitched, squeaky, unrealistic voices for female characters that just drive me up the wall a little bit. This narrator, I don't know how they pulled it off, but they sounded like a man when they were speaking the lines of male characters, and they sounded like a woman when they were speaking in the female character's voice. It was very, very impressive, and every character had a slightly different accent or intonation or pitch, and it just was very, very good. So I'm keen to listen to more books that this narrator has voiced, because I thought that was very, very well done. Ultimately, I landed on, I think, a 3.5 star for this one. I thought it was a significant step up from Never Been Kissed, but it's still not my favourite thing I've ever read. It was fun. It was definitely fun if you want a light-hearted, fun Christmassy time. It really did capture a spirit of Christmas that is sort of moved away from the consumerism of it all. And you see Matthew kind of reconnect. He's very much like not that fussed on Christmas at the beginning of the book. And you see him kind of rediscover the joy of like, he goes out and gets his grandparents like a real tree for the first time in years, because they haven't been able to like cut down a tree because they are both like in older ailing bodies. It's like difficult to do that manual labor, so he and Hector go out and they get like a real tree for the first time in years. And it's just like, it's nice to see him rediscovering the togetherness that is like the magic of Christmas, outside of the whole consumerist hellscape that it kind of has a tendency to descend into sometimes. And so that was nice. If you want something that does actually feel very Christmassy and is fun and lighthearted while still dealing with some more serious themes, things like being forced to come out before you're ready, things like mental health, strained familial relationships, things like that, then I definitely think it's a good one, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. It's just not my favourite. It's just not my favourite writing style, and I think maybe that is to do with the age of the characters. So if Timothy Janovsky has any books that are focused on older main characters, I would be interested in reading those to see if the writing style is the same and that's just like Timothy's voice, or if he kind of dials up the maturity of a little bit because he's not dealing with 21-year-olds. So that would be interesting to see. So maybe I'll do a little bit of research and see if there is that kind of offering from Timothy Janovsky for my future reads from him. Definitely, like I said, a big step up from Never Been Kissed, so I wouldn't rule out reading Timothy Janovsky again in future. For the next book that I'm going to pick up, I'm really leaning towards Look Up Handsome by Jack Strange. I love the fact that it's a Welsh setting, a Welsh author. I love to support Welsh authors where I can, but I am also still doing a lot of like crafty bits, like making presents for people and stuff, so I will maybe try and get to another audiobook as well. I think there is a Hannah Bonam-Young sapphic audiobook novella on Everend, Set the Record Straight, I want to say it is. So maybe I'll try and get around to that one as well, because it's a shorter read because it's a novella, but it'd be nice to be able to listen while I'm also, you know, doing my crochet bits. I'm going out in a bit, and then I'll be back this evening and I'll probably make a start on Look Up Handsome. So I'll be back to let you know how I get on with this. I have another reading update for you. I started Look Up Handsome by Jack Strange. I made it 39 pages into the book and I could not get any further. I'm so disappointed in this one. It is a queer holiday romance set in Hay-on-Wye featuring a bookseller and a romance author. That should have been a recipe for success for me. But you just can't convince me that this book was ever placed into the hands of an editor. It reads like a teenager's first draft of a creative writing assignment. It's just so poorly written. It was just so stilted and awkward and poorly thought through. The jokes were not landing and just read really clunky and unfunny. There were just so many moments where I was like, why have you written this? Like, this makes no sense for you to include. For example, the first part of the book, the only part of the book I was able to get through, is set on the same day. We have our main character with a friend of his. They are at Hayes Winter Literary Festival, going to a talk by the romance author Noah Sage. This really awkward, unfunny moment goes down that I think we as the reader are supposed to find really entertaining and amusing, but it was just really odd. It was just a really odd choice. Then the main character goes back to his bookshop and then he goes back out with his friend for a drink. So tell me then, why do we start chapter 5 with, it was a winter's evening and Quinn and Ivy found themselves in the Rose and Crown on Broad Street.
We know it's a winter's evening. It's the same day. You don't need to set up the season for me. I didn't automatically assume that we transitioned from the Hay Winter Literary Festival with all of the characters walking around in the snow to mid-June in the space of a day. I know it's a winter's evening. And there were just so many examples of that. The writing was so clunky and so awkward. And I just think if anybody had edited this, they would have immediately gone, you don't need to include that. Like, cut that line. And there were just so many examples of this. There was another moment a little bit later on from this where this best friend character, Ivy, is telling Quinn all about why she set up her cleaning business. They would already know that if they're established friends. And it just read very much like the author had no way of letting us know this naturally. So he had to bring it up in conversation as if Ivy and Quinn have only just met each other, even though it's already been established that they are decent friends. Like, it's just odd. There's just loads of these odd, clunky, strange choices. And I just hated it, and I could not get through another page. Getting through the first 40 odd pages of this was a struggle, and I just could not bring myself to continue with it. It is so poorly written, and I'm incredibly disappointed because I really wanted to love this one so badly. I wanted this to be great, and yeah, I just can't with a writing style of that low quality. I just can't do it. Sometimes when I didn't get on with a book, I like to, once I've formulated my own opinion about things, I like to go and have a read of the other reviews to see if I'm in the minority or if other people agreed with me or if the consensus is quite split. So I read some of the reviews for this one, and I read some of the more spoilery reviews, and partway through the book there is a trope that I just know I would have had a really rough time with, and I would have probably DNF'd the book at that point anyway, once it is revealed this twist in the book. It's just something that I cannot get on board with, and I don't enjoy very much in books. So this one was always going to be a fail for me, unfortunately, based on the narrative choices, even if the writing was great. Ultimately, very disappointed in Look Up Handsome, and would not recommend that you pick this one up. I won't go into spoiler territory about what the twist is that I didn't enjoy, but it's something that I think is quite universally disliked. Shall we just leave it there? When it comes to romance, this is not a very popular trope, and I've seen a lot of people being very critical of books that feature it in other review spaces. However, a book that I have read and now finished is Kiss Her Once For Me by Alison Cochrun. This one was always going to suffer, I think, in the shadow of The Charm Offensive, which is possibly my favourite contemporary romance that I've read. I've loved The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrun so much that I just don't think Kiss Her Once For Me was ever going to live up to it. However, having said that, still did have a good time with it. It's definitely not a new favourite or anything, but it was a perfectly enjoyable, fun, messy, queer Christmas read. If you're not familiar with Kiss Her Once For Me, we have a meet cute scenario where our main character meets this woman in a bookstore on Christmas Eve, a year prior to the events of the novel. They spend this magical day together, and our main character, Ellie, falls head over heels for this woman, and they spend the night together, and then the next day everything falls apart, and Ellie's life also starts to fall apart over the following year. So we are 1 year later, around Christmas time. Ellie has lost her dream job at an animation studio. She is struggling to make rent, and she is at imminent risk of being evicted from her apartment because her rent is going up, and she has been passed over for a promotion at the coffee shop where she works. And so she's in a bit of a desperate spot. The landlord of the building the coffee shop she works in is located in comes to her with a proposition. It's the usual fake dating setup drama. They need to fake date and get fake married so that he can claim his inheritance, because of course there's a stipulation that he has to be married to claim his inheritance, because there always is in these books. Romance novelists just love to put in a sneaky little marriage clause in an inheritance plotline. I don't know why that's so popular. Is this something that really happens? If any of you have had to fake marry somebody to get your inheritance, please let me know in the comments, because seemingly romance novelists think that this is happening all the time. So she agrees, goes along with the scheme, agrees to spend the holidays with his family so that they can deceive everybody into believing that this is a real marriage. And lo and behold, they get to the family cabin, and his sister is the woman that she spent Christmas Eve with a year before. It is, like I said, an incredibly messy setup. There is also another kind of romance situation subplot that I got quite invested in, actually, that just adds to that overall messiness. I did have a good time with this one. Alison Cochran's writing is great. Her characters were quite compelling. I would say not as interesting as the characters in The Charm Offensive. I really came to adore all of the characters in that book, even the side characters, and in Kiss Her Once For Me they didn't quite hit that same bar for me, but I still did enjoy reading about them. I think my main issue with Kiss Her Once For Me, and the reason I couldn't rate it higher than a 4-star, is given that Jack believes that Ellie and her brother Andrew are genuinely engaged, the fact that then things go on to develop between her and Ellie, even though we know that they are not cheating because the whole thing is a setup, Jack does not know this, and it's not cheating, but only one of the characters knows that it's not cheating, if you know what I mean. So it just felt very hard to root for Jack and to root for this relationship when it felt as if she thinks she's pursuing her brother's fiancé, basically. Something about that didn't always sit right with me in certain moments of the book. It's a difficult one because obviously nobody did cheat, because nobody was really together for real. They were always going to get married, split the money, and then get divorced promptly afterwards. But it just felt a little bit too closely aligned to cheating to be fully enjoyable for me. Like I said, I did enjoy the messy elements of it. This is definitely one to read if you enjoy reading about very chaotic queers who really need to get their shit together. I did enjoy seeing more mental health representation discussed in the book. The Charm Offensive was big on this, and Kiss Her Once For Me is also big on this, unsurprisingly. I also thought that it was interesting in the way that it looked at class and poverty. I feel like maybe we could have done a little bit more with the self-awareness of Andrew and Jack's characters, given that they are from substantial wealth. I feel like Andrew in particular could really have done with a bit more of a wake-up call about what that means for him compared to Ellie, but it was still fine. It was still handled okay, I thought. This is probably my favourite book that I've read so far in the vlog, but it's definitely not a favourite. It's good. I would recommend, if you want a fun, messy, sapphic Christmas romance, then you would do pretty well to pick up this one, I think. I think you would get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I think you'd have a fun time with it, but maybe just don't go into it expecting a new favourite romance of all time. It was fun, it was fluffy, it was messy, but it wasn't anything groundbreaking for me, and it definitely didn't hit the same as The Charm Offensive did for me when I read it. That book is just incredibly special to me, and Kiss Her Once For Me was probably never going to live up to that one, unfortunately. But I am still very excited to read Alison Cochran's other 2 sapphic books, Here We Go Again and Every Step She Takes, and they both sound like they're a little bit more up my alley than Kiss Her Once For Me, because it doesn't sound like we have any kind of skirting of the cheating trope, and they're also just not set at Christmas time, which I know is the whole point of the vlog. But yeah, as someone who isn't a Christmassy person, I'm not hating these Christmas romances, I have to say. I am having a decently fun time, but I'm definitely not reading anything that's going to be like a new all-time favourite, I don't think. I think this is just a vlog for silly, goofy, fun time books. I've made a start on The Nightmare Before Christmas. I didn't think I was going to get to that one because I was hoping that I would make it all the way through Look Up Handsome, but alas, as I have not, I've started The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I'm enjoying it so far. The world building feels like it's going to be quite flimsy, but I mean, it's about royal families that are to do with global holidays. So you have like the king and princes of Christmas and the prince of Halloween. So that's obviously not going to be a super highbrow epic fantasy by any means, but it does feel as though you're going to have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit with the book in service of just having fun with it. I'll be back once I've read a bit more and let you know how I'm finding it. Only a couple of chapters in at the moment, and it's fun. It's fluffy and it's fun at the minute, and I'm not hating it. So that's an improvement. I have a confession to make. I've done it again. I've read a bunch of stuff and not updated you in the slightest in between reads. My sincerest apologies. Will it happen again in future? Absolutely. Yes, it will. So just be mentally prepared. I am sorry. I have read 2 more books and I have soft DNF'd a book as well. Firstly, I listened to the audiobook of Set the Record Straight by Bonam-Young. This was a really quick, easy breezy read. I listened to it on audio. I think it was like 4.5 hours long. So it took me no time to get through it all. I think I listened to it in like 2 sittings, which is why I didn't come on sooner to update you. Set the Record Straight, I ended up giving a 3-star for reasons that I will get into. But firstly, the premise of the novella is you have these 2 childhood best friends, one of whom identifies as straight, one of whom identifies as a lesbian, and they end up coming up with this fake dating plot after 2 things happen. Firstly, straight main character, Clara, ends up in some kind of mishap at her new job where she accidentally leads her new boss to believe that she is gay. And she is panicking about this and doesn't know what to do to set the record straight. And then you also have Evan, short for Evangeline, who is the lesbian character. And she is a school teacher who has recently broken up with her ex-girlfriend of 9 years, who is a fellow teacher at her school. Her ex-girlfriend ended up cheating on her and leaving her for another one of the teachers in the school. Very, very messy school all round. Pretty sure that is several HR violations right there, but this is what has happened. Evan has been invited to the holiday party that her ex is throwing with her new girlfriend who she's moved in with. And so what is a girl to do in this scenario except ask her best friend, who is straight but she's had a crush on for most of her life, to fake date her so that they can both get out of their respective Christmassy predicaments. What I enjoyed about this novella was that Clara pretty immediately comes to the realization that she is gay and that she actually is very attracted to Evan. There wasn't any kind of dithering or beating around the bush or being in denial about your sexuality, which was quite refreshing. I feel like when we get later in life coming out stories, there's a lot of to and fro, a lot of confusion, a lot of denial, whereas Clara is like all in. As soon as she realizes that she's attracted to Evan, she kind of puts the dots together. She realizes why all of her relationships with men haven't really gone anywhere, why sex has never been particularly exciting or interesting to her, and it's because she's gay. And once she kind of realizes that, she leans in. She is so keen to explore that side of herself, so like eager to confess her feelings, and she doesn't really beat around the bush about it, which was nice and was refreshing. However, having said that, there is then no longer any real conflict to the novel. It kind of just unfolds as this nice developing relationship between 2 nice people, and there isn't really any kind of dramatic tension. There's obviously the issue of Clara has to go to the holiday party where her boss believes she's bringing her girlfriend, except she does end up bringing her girlfriend because she and Evan get together. So that's problem number 1, solved, fine. Problem number 2, the holiday party at Evan's ex's house. Again, there's a little bit of conflict here because it's difficult for Evan to see her former partner having moved on and to realise that her life isn't taking the trajectory that she thought it was, but at the same time, she's always had feelings for Clara, and so she kind of gets over it, she moves on and everything's fine. And then the final bit of conflict we're introduced to is the fact that Clara and Evan both have religious parents. Clara's parents have always been very, very accepting, very open, loving people. Evan's parents kicked her out when she came out at 18 and made her homeless, and she hasn't spoken to them or gone back to her hometown ever since. And this sets up the kind of conflict for later on in the novella. It just felt very slice of life almost after we get the big reveal of Clara being like, oh, I'm actually gay. Yeah, from that point it felt very slice of life, and it didn't feel like there was any kind of big plot beats or big plot moments that created a lot of tension and pushed the narrative forward. We were just watching these two nice women fall in love and have a relationship, and that's obviously nice and cute, and I've got nothing against that, but in the context of a novel or a novella, I want something a bit juicier, you know? I want something with a little bit of tension. I want there to be conflict somewhere. Not necessarily conflict between the two main characters. They don't have to have a falling out. I'm not saying I want a third act breakup situation. There could have been something there, some kind of push and pull, some kind of friction, something to keep the story moving forward. And there wasn't really any of that. The second issue that I had with the book, which maybe wouldn't have been an issue had I read it physically or digitally. This is one of those audiobooks where you have two narrators, one for Clara and one for Evan, which is great. I love it when an audiobook has a full cast or multiple narrators. However, in this particular book, the narrator who plays Evan, I enjoyed the narration from that voice actor significantly less than Clara's chapters, and it meant that every time we switched perspective to Evan, I was kind of frustrated and I wanted it to be over. And also, because obviously Evan is still speaking in Clara's chapters, the voices between the two actors was very different. In Clara's chapters, Evan has a much more sultry, butch-leaning kind of voice, whereas in Evan's chapters, she sounds a lot older, for one thing. She sounds a lot older than 26, which is, I think, roughly how old the characters are. She sounded incredibly timid and shy and awkward, and that makes sense to me given that Evan has autism. That was another thing I enjoyed about the book, was Evan is autistic and Clara has ADHD, and there was some nice exploration of neurodiversity. Obviously, it wasn't the most deep, in-depth exploration of representation of those conditions ever, because it's a novella. It was a little bit surface level in its exploration of neurodiversity, but it's a Christmas novella. I'm not expecting it to do anything groundbreaking, but it was cool to see, and it was cool to see that in female characters in particular, because obviously historically it's been so much more difficult for women and femme-presenting people to get diagnosed with autism and ADHD in particular. And so while that characterization kind of made sense in the Evan chapters, it just contrasted so heavily with the Evan in the Clara chapters, and it didn't work in my brain. I couldn't picture Evan very strongly because she just sounds so different from chapter to chapter, and so I couldn't get a good grasp of who she was. And yeah, I just didn't enjoy that very much at all. I think maybe that wouldn't have been so much of an issue if I had been reading it, because I still would have been able to see the sexier version of Evan from Clara's perspective, and then have a bit of a deeper insight into how Evan's mind was actually working in the Evan chapters without there being such a dramatic tonal difference in what her voice sounded like. Does that make any sense? I don't know. Maybe I'm just chatting shit. But for me, the narration of it just didn't work. I just wished that the narrator who voiced Clara had narrated the whole thing, because that actor was really good. The voice of Clara and Evan was really distinct within those chapters. I just enjoyed the narration in those chapters significantly more than the Evan chapters, which meant it was a bit of a frustrating listening experience. So this isn't a bad book by any means. It just wasn't as successful as I wanted it to be. I was a bit nervous going into it about the whole like playing gay aspect of it, given that it's fake dating between a straight girl and a lesbian, even though you know eventually Clara is going to realise that she's gay or bisexual. I was a bit nervous about the setup of that, but Evan is the one that introduces that idea, which made me feel a little bit less uneasy about that as a premise, because the straight girl didn't come up with it. I think if we'd had the straight character being like, hey, can you pretend to be my girlfriend so I can play gay at work, that could have been incredibly troublesome as a trope, but that's not the way that the novella goes, so I was pleased with that. Ultimately, if you want a very spicy for a short amount of pages, there was quite a lot of spice in this one. So if you want something spicy, something sapphic, something that's a bit heartwarming, something very, very low stakes where there isn't a lot of angst, then this is going to be perfect for you. But for me, I want the angst, okay? I'm here for the angst. So that was Set the Record Straight. While listening to Set the Record Straight, I did also make a start on The Nightmare Before Christmas by Sarah Rash. I made it to 50 pages in, and this is not a bad book, again, by any means. It's actually, I thought, fairly fun and whimsical and enjoyable, but I'm just Christmased out. I'm just so Christmased out by this point, and I wanted to give myself the best possible chance to enjoy this book, because I do think this is the kind of thing that would be up my street. It's got a real world setting with a fantasy undercurrent kind of similar to Good Spirits. Again, it's got that angst, like the main character Cole is like incredibly angsty and has loads of family issues, which obviously not fun for people in real life, but it's fun to read about. And I do think this is going to be an enjoyable read. I was enjoying the characters, but I just couldn't bring myself to read a, what is this, 350 page? Yeah, roughly 350 page book about Christmas, because I'm so over it. I'm so done reading about Christmas. I just need to read something else. But I didn't want to leave the vlog on a DNF, a soft DNF, though I will come back to this in future, maybe next Christmas, because I do think this seems like a lot of fun and it could be a bit of me. Didn't want to leave the vlog on a DNF. So you may have heard me mention the Brent Boy series a couple of times on this channel, which is a rom-com series by DP Clarence. The first book in that series is The Paperboys, which I read earlier this year and really enjoyed. And between The Paperboys and Going Solo, which is the second book in the series, there is a novella, a Christmas novella, focusing on Sunny and Ludo, who are the couple that we focus on in The Paperboys. I really wanted to get my hands on that and read it before I check out the second book in the series, and then the third book, which is coming out in 2026. So I ended up getting that on my Kobo. It's free to download when you sign up to DP Clarence's newsletter. I nabbed that, put it on my Kobo, and I just read it in one sitting in an evening, and it was just lovely and fun and heartwarming and honestly a really nice ending to the vlog. I didn't bother to give this one a star rating because I kind of just see it as an extension of the story of The Paperboys, which, if I remember correctly, I gave a 4.25 star when I read it earlier this year. I'm not going to go into it too much, so sorry if this is a frustrating ending for the vlog, but I had a nice time. I'm not going to go into the plot synopsis of The Silly Season, which is the novella, too much, because I don't want to give away the plot of The Paperboys and the ending of The Paperboys. We're following Sunny and Ludo from The Paperboys as they spend Christmas together and their parents are meeting for the first time. That's all I'll say. But if you're interested in reading The Paperboys and knowing a little bit more about that book, the premise of that is you have Sunny and Ludo, who are kind of rival journalists. Sunny is working at this kind of rag, like the Sun kind of style newspaper that's not very well respected, and he's having to write these fluff pieces that he really hates, and he wants to do much more serious journalism. Then you have Ludo, who is the son of very prominent, well-respected and well-off journalists, and they initially clash a little bit, both from incredibly different backgrounds. Sunny is very working class and Ludo is very, very posh. They end up working on covering the same kind of government story, and they develop this friendship that develops into something more, and it was full of banter. It was very light-hearted, very sweet. I really enjoyed Sunny and Ludo a whole lot. They are two really lovely characters to follow. The one thing I will say about D.P. Clarence's writing style is he is, I believe, Australian, but he has moved to the UK and lives here now. And the way he writes is very much somebody who loves the UK very dearly, but is writing in a very stereotypically British way, but by someone who clearly is not British. And so there are some interesting stereotypes and some bits of slang that slip into the writing style of the Paperboys and the Silly Season that can be a little bit eye-rolly at times for somebody who is actually British. It's maybe a little bit over the top, and it doesn't always read the most natural. But if you aren't from the UK, this maybe won't be an issue for you. And if you are from the UK, like me, hopefully, like I did, you'll find the story compelling enough to kind of get over that little quirk of the writing. Another great thing about this series, I can't comment on the two other books in the series, the one that's been released and the one that's coming in 2026, but Paperboys and the Silly Season are both fade to black. So this is a great one to pick up if you're someone who's looking for no spice in your books. There is a lot of horniness. There's a lot of talk of being horny and hooking up and hookup culture and things like that, but everything is fade to black, to my knowledge, to my recollection. It's definitely not super smutty or super spicy at all. So if you're someone who is not looking for that in your books and you want to enjoy a rom-com that is genuinely very funny, charming and heartwarming, but without any of the added intimate scenes, then this one would be great for you. If you are looking for something that is minimal on the spice, then I would absolutely recommend at least the Paperboys and the Silly Season. I can imagine that going solo is going to be much the same, but I've seen other authors go from writing in a fade to black style to writing full sex scenes later down in the line in their other books, so I don't want to speak prematurely on that. For all I know, going solo could be spicy as hell. I don't know, I haven't read it. But the first two books, or the first book and the companion novella, are both fade to black. So a great one for people who aren't looking to read any spice. So there you have it. That is everything I've read. Do I now love Christmas? No. Unfortunately, in that respect, the vlog has failed, and I still feel just as ambivalent about Christmas as I did at the beginning of the vlog, but I will give credit where credit is due, and I do think that reading these books has made what is a stressful time of year for me usually a little bit more fun, a little bit more silly and whimsical and enjoyable. So I may not be a Christmas convert, but I do have to hand it to all of these books for helping me get through this time of year. If I had to tell you the book that's made me feel the most Christmassy, I think it might be You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, which is really surprising because not my favourite read of the vlog. I think objectively the best book that I read in the vlog was Kiss Her Once for me, but You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince just has a really lovely setting that is all about community. The people in that town all know each other and love each other. There's a real sense of coming together to be together in the holiday season. And yeah, I really enjoyed that about it. It was quite a nice antidote to all of the kind of rampant consumerism that we see at this time of year. So yeah, I think ultimately if you're looking for the most Christmassy feeling, romance novel from this vlog, then yeah, definitely check out You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince. Good Spirits was also lovely, but sad. But that one had real moments of sadness, and it had this kind of overarching sense of these two very lonely and depressed souls coming together. And so in that sense, it was maybe a little bit deeper in tone than some of the other ones. Again, Kiss Her Once for me focused a lot on mental health and familial struggles and things like that. And You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince did as well, but there were just so many joyful side characters that came together to make Matthew's life so much better that the tone of that one still felt a lot lighter. Set the Record Straight deals with queer kids being rejected by their parents, which is not the most Christmassy feeling thing in the world. And even though Evan does go on to have like big found family moments, those vibes were much stronger in You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince. So hats off Timothy Janovsky for making me feel a shred of the Christmas spirit this year. Thank you for that. I would love to know what you've been reading lately. Do you ever pick up Christmas romances at this time of year? Or are you like me and you don't want to read anything Christmassy whatsoever under usual circumstances? Let me know down below in the comments what you've been reading in December. I'd love to hear. Leave me a like if you enjoyed the video. I'd appreciate it a lot. Subscribe if you want to see some more vlogs from me in 2026. And until then, stay safe and happy reading.